I'm Aurora Fane.
So the pair of you decided my wife's ballroom was not good enough to raise money for your charity.
Season 3 of The Gilded Age is shaping up to be a game changer, and honestly, it sounds like things are about to get even more intense. The new season, which is set to arrive sometime in late 2025, will pick up right after the dramatic events of the Season 2 finale. If you remember, Bertha Russell seemed to have struck a big deal to get the Duke of Buckingham to attend her opera opening, basically promising her daughter Gladys's hand in marriage just to make sure he showed up. Now that Bertha's star is rising and she's cemented her spot in high society, the next season is expected to dive into a very different New York, one where social norms are being flipped on their heads. Francesca Orsi, one of HBO's top executives, recently gave some insight into what we can expect. In an interview, she mentioned that Season 3 is going to explore how divorce started becoming a more talked about issue in American society during that time. That's a pretty big deal, especially considering how taboo it was back then. She also hinted at how this ties into arranged marriages, which were common among upper-class families trying to maintain their social status. The main idea is to look at what happens when those arranged relationships don't work out and how society responds to someone stepping outside the norm and seeking a divorce. That might not seem like a bombshell now, but back in the 1800s, it could ruin someone's reputation overnight. So how does this all tie into the show's current characters? Well, Orsi didn't mention anyone by name, but the comment about arranged marriages immediately brings Gladys Russell to mind. At the end of Season 2, it was pretty clear she wasn't exactly thrilled about being paired with the Duke. So it's possible that Season 3 might pick up after she's already married him, and if that's the case, her struggle to get out of an unwanted marriage could become a major storyline. It could also lead to bigger conflicts, especially with her mother Bertha, who worked so hard to secure that match in the first place. Then again, it's also possible that another character might find themselves heading for a divorce, maybe even one of the new characters being introduced this season. Either way, the show is clearly leaning into this theme of evolving societal expectations. We've already seen the old money elite struggling to accept the newer families climbing the social ladder. Now, the idea of people rejecting the conventions of marriage altogether just adds another layer to the drama. What's particularly interesting about this storyline is how it fits into the broader themes the show has always tackled. From the very beginning, The Gilded Age has been about the clash between tradition and change, old money versus new, social customs versus personal freedom, and now by exploring topics like divorce and arranged marriage, the show gets to examine how these tensions play out in real people's lives. It's a natural progression that feels both timely and rooted in history. And speaking of history, let's not forget that many elements of The Gilded Age are inspired by real events and figures. For instance, Julian Fellowes, the show's creator, revealed in HBO's official podcast that George Russell is actually based on the real-life railroad tycoon Jay Gould. Gould was one of the so-called robber barons of the era, known for being ruthless in business but also very devoted to his family. Much like George, he didn't exactly win over the old money crowd, especially not the likes of Mrs. Astor, who led New York's most exclusive social circle known as the 400. In the real world, Mrs. Astor didn't think much of Jay Gould and didn't want anything to do with him socially. It wasn't until much later, after Gould had died, that his children were finally allowed into high society. And that dynamic seems to be playing out on screen as well. In the show, we've seen Bertha and George slowly start to gain ground with the social elite, but there's still a clear line between being tolerated and being fully accepted. In fact, George and Bertha's struggle to fit in reached a turning point in the Season 1 finale. That's when they managed to get most of the old money families to attend Gladys's debutante ball. It was a big win, symbolizing that the Russells might finally be breaking into the circle they've been eyeing for so long. It also shows how The Gilded Age mixes real history with just enough fictional flair to keep things unpredictable. In reality, Jay Gould's kids had to wait for their father to die before they were accepted. But in the show, maybe the Russells will pull it off while they're still alive and very much at the center of things. Even though the show is set in the past, a lot of what it explores still feels relevant. The whole concept of social status, marriage for appearances, and even workers' rights, all of it resonates today. In Season 2, for instance, George Russell has been dealing with rising tension from unions. That mirrors what happened to Jay Gould during the Great Southwest Railroad Strike of 1886. In that historical event, a major labor dispute led to violence and even death, all because workers were trying to get better conditions. The show doesn't shy away from showing how industrialists like George and Gould had to confront the consequences of their business practices. What makes this even more compelling is how Fellowes manages to keep it historically grounded while also giving the story emotional depth. You're not just watching a history lesson, you're watching people fight for their place in a world that's constantly shifting. George, for example, may be based on a ruthless businessman, but Morgan Spector, who plays him, brings out the human side of the character. In interviews, Spector said he dove deep into the real biographies of figures like Gould, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, and Rockefeller to understand the mindset of those Gilded Age tycoons. He read everything from the first-person writings to massive books about the era to really grasp the stakes these men were up against. It's also interesting to note that Gould and Vanderbilt, who both influenced George's character, didn't leave behind their own autobiographies. That means a lot of what we know about them comes from outside accounts, which gives the show more room to interpret their lives through drama. While Rockefeller and Carnegie had different industries, oil and steel respectively, Gould and Vanderbilt were all about railroads and shipping. And even though they were hugely successful, they often got overshadowed by the bigger names in American business history. In some ways, that makes George Russell's story all the more compelling because he's trying to be remembered, not just wealthy. Beyond George, a lot of the show's characters are inspired by real people. The Russells mirror the Vanderbilts in many ways, especially when it comes to using marriage as a strategy to elevate the family's social status. Meanwhile, characters like Mamie Fish, Ward McAllister, and T. Thomas Fortune are directly pulled from history. The show also tackles major historical moments like women's rights and school integration that were just starting to gain momentum during this period. Even though The Gilded Age is a fictional drama, it treats its historical setting with care, weaving in real events and figures to give the story more weight. For instance, Season 2 introduced Emily Warren Roebling, the woman who helped oversee the completion of the Brooklyn Bridge. That storyline was not just a nod to her achievements, but also a way to spotlight the role of women in shaping modern America, even when they weren't given the credit for it at the time. So with all that in mind, Season 3 really does have the potential to be the most emotionally charged and socially relevant chapter of the series so far. And whether they cling to the old ways or embrace something new, that's what makes the show so addictive. It's grounded in history, but it's constantly asking questions that still matter today. And that's a wrap for today's video. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next one.